Nothing is higher than sharing the truth, and his version of seeking the truth is such that even the divine has us almost in the sense of truth-knowing as equals, and that we each are allotted part of the truth, and God is sharing with us, and we share back with each other and with God. Now, his idea of what gnosis is, or what seeking the truth is very, very similar to what we found again and again and again when we looked into Hindu myths. And that is practice asceticism and contemplate self. Especially the contemplation of self, but almost all of the talking, or all of the introductions that he is going to bring up are going to be about asceticism in very, very unusual way. For him, it's all a transcendental life. The more you ponder and the more you live things in the transcendent, actually, the more you actually come right into the material world. And he has a lovely statement. And I'm going to do a lot of reading tonight because I don't know how else to get it to you if you're not getting the chance to read it. He says, "Nay, I believe the good fortune of aeonian life, the which the God hath gotten for his lot, is that by reason of his gnosis the things in Genesis should not entirely die. For when the knowing of existing things and the being wise is taken from it, freedom from death is time, not life." It's the most, he's really obscure. If you think this is obscure, this was a hard week for me. I had sometimes 5 and 6 books piled up at a time trying to figure out what was being said and how, because it's really coded, very heavily coded. In fact, you can be sure that most of what we're going to be dealing with tonight is unknown to me. It was unknown to me, and unless you are an initiate that can dig into it, a lot of it's just going to go flying by us. But what he's saying is, with the aeonian life, it is the eternal life. And it's a very lovely statement he makes there, that even after everything has vanished, and even after life itself is gone, in time, the truth will still exist. Which is, he's stating, just as we've been stating in these classes, that time is one of the potentials in the absolute. And having experienced something in the absolute, that experience is absolutely there. Only it is there as an activated potential, and not necessarily as the broadcloth experience itself. And so that everything that once, it's almost like saying that the absolute is, like something gets lit up in it and it's all there, and then once the light goes out it's still there, only it's just not lit up. But in the lighting of it, what was there, in the form of it at least, is gone. And for him the form goes all the way to the spiritual worlds. It's very much, the feeling of it is like Madame Blavatsky's statement in the stanzas of Dizian, where she says, "That which is, and yet is not was." And it's sort of like the sense of things in the absolute. They're there, and they're not there, and they weren't there, but they are. So, it's, I don't know how to say it any other way. So that's the big thing, is that from the very get-go, the start of the whole piece, the idea is that this is truth-seeking. And that truth-seeking is the only thing that we can do that is eternal, and he puts down what he's trying to do right away in the beginning. Well, I'm going to start reading from here on in. We're going to read about 15 pages probably, but a little at a time. We'll read and comment and read and comment. The second of the 11 introductions is called The Art of Knowing and of Divining. Only he has the divining, divinicing. Mead does in a translation, which is, he wants to make it more than just divining. Wherefore the longing for the godly state is a desire for truth, and specially the truth about the gods, insomuch as it doth embrace reception of sacred things, instruction and research. A work more holy is all, and then is all and every purging rite in temple service, and not least pleasing to that goddess whom thou servest, in that she is particularly wise and wisdom-loving, seeing her very name doth seem to indicate that the gnosis is more suitable to her than any other title. For that Isis is Greek, and so is Typhon, in that he's full unto the goddess and is puffed up through his unknowing and deceit, and tears the holy reason, logos, into pieces and makes away with it, the which the goddess gathers up again and recomposes and transmits to those perfected in the art of divinicing, which means of a continually sober life, and by their abstinence from many foods and sexual indulgences, tempers intemperate pleasure love, and tempers intemperate pleasure love, and doth accustom them to undergo without being broken down the rigorous tasks of service in the sacred rites, the end of which is gnosis of the first and lordly one, the one whom mind alone can know, for whom the goddess calls on them to seek, though he is by her side and one with her. Nay, the very appellation of the holy place doth plainly promise gnosis, and that is eidesis, of that which is, for it is named Asidion, as though of them who shall know that which is, if that with reason and with purity we enter in the holy places of the goddess. Now, believe it or not, there's a tremendous amount of obfuscation in that. I've never read anything more, and I've read this I don't know how many times. I've never read anything that is more open and more closed at the same time. Clearly, he's saying right out that this is meant to be purifying and opening to the gods. But then he gets into all of those tricky things, some of which are so subtle that even Mead doesn't get it. Like, for example, he says Isis and Typhon are Greek, meaning as opposed to Egyptian. In Egyptian, they are Ast and Set are the names for Isis and Typhon. But it's not clear that Mead gets the meaning that when they are Greek, that means in the pondering of wisdom. Because as we said in the very first talk in this series, that the name Greece came from the people who contemplated the divine feminine wisdom of the Grey sisters, meaning the Greeks. So he seems to miss that meaning. Isis literally means in Greek, she who weeps. And so what Plutarch is talking about here is that Isis means a soul purification in the process of weeping. And that means not only the weeping of sorrow from living a worldly life and it means not only a weeping that comes from sacrifice or even from joy. What is being talked about here is very alchemical. In the highest sense, alchemy means the science of Egypt. Al means the. Chem, as we know, Chemenu was the city of Mercury, of Hermopolis, and alchemy means then the science of Egypt. And this is an alchemical term because Isis, in her crying, means the precipitation of tears. And so we're talking about the alchemical process whereby seeking the higher wisdom and contemplating it, it's almost like looking into the sun. It is clarifying, because the mind gets clarified by precipitating thoughts and precipitating feelings, so that finally all that is left is a clear light of truth. It's a most ingenious thing. Now there are puns in here. Tim has read this, and when it's talking about the line in here that for Isis is Greek and so is Typhon, in that he's full unto the goddess and is puffed up through his unknowing and deceit and tears the holy reason into pieces. The puffed up is a double play, because the puffed up is like the billowing of smoke, as well as being puffed up with vanity. The word typhon in Greek means stupefying smoke, or it means hot wind, or it means, like it does here, typhoon, a hurricane, or in our case a whirlwind, or a holy vortex in some way. So what this is talking then, smoke is the particularization of matter. And it is not an inspired burning, but a burning in desire. And it represents a very great vortical transformation. So what he's talking about then is that the precipitation itself, because at the heart of raindrops are little bits of dust. At the heart of every snowflake is dust. And this is why, one of the reasons why the air is so clear after a rain shower or after a snowstorm, is because the air that follows has had all of the dust removed from it. And so it's talking then about the desires of egotism that lead to all of the dusting process. Now it even goes further than this, because the kind of smoke that Plutarch is talking about is sulfurous smoke. And the Greeks and even the alchemists, the pre-Renaissance and Renaissance alchemists, had a divination by inhaling sulfur smoke. They would inhale the smoke and inhale it until it got them into a stupefaction that really wasn't a stupefaction, but it caused them to leave their body, and they would have visions and they would be forced out of the body. It's very, very interesting in other ways, because Typhon is, or Set, is described as being a red-haired, donkey-like creature with a cloven hoof. And so it's very much allied with the Luciferic force. And to this day, we still call matches Lucifers. And so the whole idea of the Christ being the manifestation of the divine feminine and being the Isis-like precipitation as being counter to the material, egotistical, dusty qualities, it's talking about a process and an interaction and how we withdraw from the material world by sacrificing. It's a really very beautiful thing, but it's tied right down to the elements that are in it, and the way that it has been used historically. The Greeks used to practice sulfur inhalation a lot. And he says people are clarified by the tears of Isis until they see the light, and in that light they apperceive the intelligible. And that's talking exactly about the life spirit. And it's, the whole doctrine, even though it's about Isis and written to a priestess of Apollo who was herself a votary of Isis, it's much more Platonism than anything else. By the time we get to the end of these introductions, we're going to be into all kinds of Platonism. So it's really very, very clever the way he does this. However, the modern mysteries would not claim that it's untrue, and they would not disparage it, but the modern mysteries would look at it differently from the Platonists, and they would see it in a different way. They would see it more not as a process of freeing ourselves from our condemnation into materialism. They would see it much more, modern mystery students would see it much more as a creative activity. And we have averred before that the solid, that is the absolute, that is everything that could be, is so thick, it's so rare, it's the absolute of rareness and the absolute of thickness at the same time, and that when we creatively project our consciousness into it, we congeal as much of that density as we are capable of precipitating with our consciousness. And then we interact with it, and we said that the process of interacting, since we cannot take the whole because it's completely contiguous throughout all of that which space points to. You couldn't take the whole of it, so we break it, we atomize it, and we break it into little particles, which is like the smoke. And so it is exactly like from the Western point of view, it is like the tears then would be the tears of artistic or creative sacrifice, and the smoke itself would be inhaled in the same way that we ingest food. And we do the same thing with ingesting food. Food is, the whole process of eating is an alchemical process. We take things in a large form, and we keep digesting. We keep breaking them into smaller and smaller parts, and then we absorb those smaller parts, and then we assimilate them, and then we discard waste, some of the waste being from previous eatings. And so the atomization process, or the alchemicalization of taking the matter in and bringing it to a higher state of consciousness as a creative activity, is the way the modern mysteries would more tend to look at it. Now we have to go into something extremely deep in an intellectual sense. And I'll mention a principle that some of you that have been coming to classes like this for a while are familiar with. But I want to go into it again because it plays in and out of this whole introduction many times. This is a highly, it is indeed like a symphony. There are several themes, and those themes come back in different forms, so there is a thematic evolution, and it's just, lovely. It is by the giving of love and imagination that the life spirit, the divine feminine, maintains its irreducible purity and its unbreakable light, its life that never ceases. And it does that by living out of itself that which is not it, but would but which could be. What I'm trying to say is that the pure imagination is the source of all imaginings. And that in the process of being behind and giving off these imaginings to the beings that imagine them by the utilization of this life, that's how it remains alive. And in that process, it becomes more alive, it becomes more pure, and it becomes more light. And to do that, we're going to go back into something that we've talked about for a long time ago. It has to do with the mathematics of disorganization. And the chief principle of the mathematics of disorganization is that there are an infinite number of forms of organization, and that there is and only can be one form of disorganization. We can get a little bit of a picture of that disorganization by playing the dot game. If we allow the blackboard, we'll just let that be the beginning. If we allow the blackboard to be the potential of either space or time within the absolute, the way the absolute becomes manifest as the spiritual feminine is through the principle of disorganization. Now, Moses saw the hind end of Jehovah, and what we're going to do is look at the backside of the life spirit or of the Christ. This is sort of the backside, and it reveals the object of the dot game is once you have put down one dot, you can put down any number of dots, and in that try and describe ultimate disorganization. And so you put down another dot. Does that describe disorganization? Maybe yes, maybe no. So you put down another dot. And does that describe disorganization? No. But does it form a pattern? The other law is that you must never form a pattern. Anytime you have a repeat pattern, you no longer have a disorganization. So every time you start putting a dot down, you've got to think, is this like any other combination of 3 or more dots that have ever been before? And before you, it's worse than a chess game or a Go game, because you keep on putting down dots, and you have to think more on each time, because if you don't, you will produce a pattern. And then
number game?
Not? It's
a number game?
No, I don't know if it's a prime number game. It's called the
prime numbers are related to nothing before it, so
it could be that, yeah. So it's like a prince. It's called. I'm trying to get to a point, but it's a point that goes on infinitely. So what happens is you ponder the dots more and more and more, but when you ponder them, you say, I can't put down a dot here because that would make a triangle that is like this triangle. But you've already done it in your consciousness before you put the dot down. So you have produced an organization in the imagination that has not become materially manifest. And that imaginary organization becomes something that you can't put it down because that wouldn't be the disorganization. But yet it is made to exist in trying to simulate the disorganization. Now the really tricky thing about this is that once you put one dot down, you are hooked for all of infinity. Forever and ever. Because if you stop, I don't know if there's anything patterned here or not, but once you stop, If you stop, you could reproduce that, and then there would be two like that, and then you would have an organization. So you have to keep on going, which is to indicate the eternal life by having to continuously put down an infinite number of dots. And the more dots that you get down, the more you see that you can't put one here, you can't put one there, you can't put one there, you begin to sense that there is something in common between all of these potential patterns, and that thing that is in common between all these potential patterns is the ultimate disorganization. You sense it the more you begin to see the ultimate wisdom that can produce all of these imaginings, but because you never make any of those imaginings. Because but you see, in the very process of contemplating how you would produce an organization, you wake up to that divine wisdom that in effect makes all of them. But what happens is, what you have put into those potential patterns, which aren't you, or that which aren't the perfect disorganization, or which aren't the perfect imagination, your life has gone into them, and they become sort of an offal, O-F-F-A-L, and they represent then this is what the plain make-believe for keeps is all about. They lived out to the end. And, they're carried to their fruition, and this is how, in one way of looking at it, it's certainly not the absolute way of looking at it, in one way, this is how the divine imagination, how the divine becomes more divine in the process of throwing off what isn't it, which does become it in the process of knowing that came from me in a way that, because I know now that it was in me in an unconscious fashion, and that you're taking something of a raw potential that has never been before but could have been, but in the process of studying the whole of it, you come to understand a new way that it could be. And so that the universe or universes become more and more fabulous as time goes on. The dot game is the perfect analogy for us, because not only the forms but the dots represent the precipitations of what happens in the divine self becoming, and it isn't just an escape from those things, because those things do come back within the one, and it is an assimilative process, or an absorption and assimilative process. One gets the spirit then of, like what Christ speaking as the voice of the life spirit says when it says, my ways are not your ways. And you get the spirit of how you win by losing. And you get the whole idea, because the life spirit is the feminine, which is the sacrificer, and it lays down its life, and because it lays down its life, it has it. And it is the whole spirit of all of that. It is called, for example, in the philosophical treatises on Taoism, for example, it is called active passivism. That you don't resist things, you don't fight things, but there is another kind of transcendent living, that in living in that you can be very vigorous in your daily activities, but yet at the same time being in this very full transcendent life. This is probably the most important thing we're going to talk about all night. It's probably the only really meaty tidbit that we have. I keep coming back to it again and again, and it keeps popping up. But it's a really very, very lovely thing that, and this, this is the deepest level that I can take the whole idea of crying and of smoke all together. So now we have only 9 more introductions. And since we're going to be culture, we're going to go into all of these things. And they're mystery literature. As you can see from just that little passage, reading somebody like this is why reading the G.R.S. Mead is so important, because Mead is familiar with some of the symbols of the mysteries and some of the principles, and so he gives you hints. And he even gives you hints when he thinks that there might be something of the mysteries here, whether he knows it or not. And it's a totally different way than we normally think about things. It's hard work. It's extremely hard work, but that is some of the initiatory work, is to solve riddles or to solve problems like this. And I find it very ironic that it is clearer in some respects than modern mystery literature. Because when you read something like this, you know there's something weird going on. And you know that you have to dig down, and you dig right into those strange weirdnesses. And when you do, you get behind things. The problem with reading modern mystery literature, like reading Steiner and Heindel, is that it seems so predigested. You read it, you feel you know it. It seems so clear to you that this is it. Sometimes it's intellectually challenging, or you can't feel some of those same kinds of feelings, but it seems so clear that there's not any reason to dig in any further. And that is what the modern obfuscation is like. It isn't an intended obfuscation. The statement is made that as the centuries go on and humanity becomes more and more advanced, and we've become further through that leap of faith period, that it becomes harder and harder and harder to become an initiate into the mysteries. And I think that this is one of the reasons why, is because we're all so willing to take it that this is as it is. And in order to become an initiate into the mysteries, you have to take the fast route, which means an intense creativity, which means that you have to break through the apparencies of it being so clear. So, all right. The next subsection, I don't want to belabor a point. The next subsection is called The True Initiates of Isis. How long is it? Not very long. A page and just about a half. Yet many have set down that she is Hermes' daughter, and many that she is Prometheus's, holding the latter as discoverer of wisdom and foreknowledge, and Hermes as the art of letters and the Muses' art. Wherefore in Hermes' city they call the foremost of the Muses Isis, whereas righteousness, meaning Mot, in that she's wise and has been said and shows the mysteries of the gods to those who are with truth and justice called the carriers of the holy symbols and the wearers of the holy robes. And these are they who carry the holy reason, Logos, about the gods, purged of all superstition and superfluity in their soul, as in a chest, like the chest that Osiris gets put into, and cast robes around it, in secret disclosing such things of the opinion about the gods as are black and shadowy, and such as are clear and bright, just as they are suggested by the sacred dress, black and white. Wherefore, when the initiates of Isis at their death are adorned in these robes, it is a symbol that this reason, Logos, is with them, and with him and not else they go there. For it is not the growing beard and wearing cloak that makes philosophers, O Kalia, nor in linen and shaving oneself that makes initiates of Isis, but a true Isosaic is one who, when he by law receives them, searches out by reason the mystery shown and done concerning these gods, and meditates on the truth in them. Now it seems reasonably simple, straightforward, and clear, but it's again filled with all kinds of obfuscations or all kinds of code words. It's not just talking about Hermopolis, which is Kemenu. Kemenu was the city of the nome of Kem. It was the capital city, and it was the city of Hermes. And it isn't just talking about Hermes and Prometheus as, for example. It is pointing to something very clear and true. We have talked from the very beginning of these talks that there are two branches of humanity. One is the children of fire, and one is the children of water. The children of fire are, mythologically speaking, the children of Eve and Lucifer. And the Lucifers are sometimes called the firelings. And to the Greeks, one of the uses of the term Titan meant Lucifer. And so when it is then talking about Prometheus, it is talking about a Lucifer spirit who brought fire of knowing and of spiritual self-consciousness to humans. Later on, those Luciferic children of our humanity were brought the initiations by the people from Mercury. So we have Hermetic wisdom, and so when it's pointing to Hermopolis and when it's pointing to Hermes or Thoth in the Egyptian and to Prometheus, it's pointing to say that this is of the mysteries. It goes even further because it talks about where they celebrate the mysteries in Kemenu, Hermopolis. And what it's talking about is that in Hermopolis, they had a pout, and a pout is an organization of gods in various triangles. The smaller, less important cities would have something like this, which would be a four-pout. Something like this would be a six-pout. And the structure of the pout at Hermopolis was a nine-pout. There were 9 gods and goddesses, and then the invisible 10th was Hermes Thoth himself. And so what we're talking about with the invisible 10th is we're talking about the Kabbalistic tree of life. But we are also talking, this is a code word of saying the way the mysteries are celebrated at Hermopolis, where Isis is considered the mother wisdom from which all of this knowledge comes from, is we're talking about the 9 lesser mysteries that lead to the greater consciousness that comes out with the 10th initiation, which brings us beyond the human state. So there's a large amount of geometry in here, which may be a little bit more tedious than everybody wants to go into. But at any rate, the justice, he then goes on to talk about her, sometimes Isis is called Mat, the other feminine, which is Venus, the scale keeper, the justice, Mat's balance. And he then takes the whole thing to justice, meaning to say the only ones that can receive initiation are those who live to the letter of the law and those whose time has come ripe in terms of destiny, that they're ready for it. Not everybody can be initiated into the mystery. You have to have the soul power, and this is determined by a law, and then you go through all of these tests and trials and such like that he refers to. So it's very clear. And then he claims that these people carry the word that was divided up, and he's talking here about the lost word of Freemasonry, and the lost word is not a verbal word, but the lost word, the word here is logos, which is another name for the pure imagination. It is the word from which all names come from. And it is the word that is the organizer that is itself disorganized. So that the carriers of the word, this is a repetition going back to the light of logos. All right, enough of that. Then he has some very interesting things that he says here. He states that the initiates put on the robes in order to make the mysteries more alluring. Now he's relating to all kinds of things here. In the first place, when they talk about swaddling clothes, or when they talk about the bands that surround mummies, or when they talk about the robes that surround initiates that are wrapped in certain ways, what they're talking about in one way is someone who can direct and properly control the etheric currents in the vital body, and this is an absolutely necessary thing to have the second birth. The initiate birth. You have to have the soul material built into your etheric body by doing service and by contemplating the truth and by observing and doing such like that. But the organization is what is referred to when it's talked about the putting on the robes of death. The robes of death are not talking about funerary robes, because the death here is referred to as the little death, which is initiation. That when like you leave your body as though it were dead. Now, he sees these very much as coverings. He sees that they conceal. And he realizes that when they speak these truths, the initiates, when they tell these mythical stories, are covering and concealing things. But he has a very interesting take on it. Plutarch's take is that by putting clothes on, it's very much like clothing has become now, it becomes suggestive. And that the way the clothing is put on suggests more mystery. It becomes more alluring, that you get engaged in the covering and then you get drawn into the truth that way. So he's saying that they both are a concealment, but they lead by following the path of the covering. They lead to a divine revealing, which is a really interesting psychology, which is again opposite of the modern mysteries. The modern mysteries put everything out in the open, and the ancients concealed not just for safety's sake, and not just because people weren't intellectual enough to understand it straightforward, but they conceal for allurement. And this is to keep things from being taken for granted. When we have mystery literature like this, something that's engaging and exciting, this is, I think, the big call of games, whether they are arcade games or computer games or even the little psychological games that we have, is that they keep us from taking things for granted. True, we can get lost in clothing, and true, we can get lost in games, but that can happen anyway. But the intent here is to have something that you don't take it for granted, that you know the truth, and that you really start digging into it. Now, it's interesting then, instead of the man becoming the clothes become the man. That is to say, going all the way back now to the dot game, it is how the divine becomes human is by putting on the robes. And so we have this whole play of putting on the robes and taking off the robes he's saying there's a much allurement and as much creativity in the putting on of clothes as there is in the striptease. Though most of what he's going to have to say has to do with the striptease. And then he closes by saying that only those who are ready can really be initiated, and saying that the personal effects don't make the philosopher, but only the life makes. I want to be an Orpheus. I really want to be an Orpheus and have that head that never quits. The next subtopic is called On the Drinking of Wine. And now we're getting down to the real nitty-gritty. We started out with that lovely pure truth, and we talked about, all right. And as for the wine, the servants of God in Sun City do not at all bring it into the sacred place, as 'tis not right for them to drink by day while he, their Lord and King, looks on. The rest of them use it indeed, but sparingly. They have, however, many times of abstinence at which they drink no wine, but spend them in search for wisdom, learning, and teaching the truth about the gods. The kings used to drink it, though in certain measure according to the sacred writings, as Hecatus has narrated, for they were priests as well, meaning to say the kings. They began to drink it, however, only from the time of Psammetichus, but before that they used not to drink wine. Nor did they make libation of it as a thing dear to the gods, but as the blood of those who fought against the gods, from whom, when they fell and mingled with the earth, they think the vines came, and that because of this wine drinking makes men to be out of their mind and struck inside, in that forsooth they are fulfilled with the forefathers of its blood. In these things, at any rate, Eudoxus says in Book 2 of his Circuit, are thus stated by the priests. More obscurity. It's fun. He's talking about when he's talking about the Sun City, he's talking about Heliopolis, which is now sort of on the western suburbs of Cairo. It's where the famous obelisks and lions and such are that are always classically pictured with Egypt. That's a setting straight out of the temple at Heliopolis. The times that he gives for the beginning of the kings and the people to drink wine are very similar to the times given by the Greeks and other Mid-Easterners, roughly, I think 600 or 800 BC, that viniculture became a thing throughout the Mideast, Egypt included. The priests at Heliopolis, Helios and Apollo are both solar. That's why they call it Heliopolis. And the priests of Apollo in Greece also did not drink wine because they were pure water people. And the timing is right. And the attitude here is that the people had to do it. It was something unholy, but it was something they had to do. And that's pretty much the attitude that all the mystery schools had in ancient Greece. We're not certain why this has to be, but the cult of Bacchus has to come into being, and people have to be made mad with drunkenness, and we will go along with this because this is what the gods have declared. The modern mysteries give better meaning to this, In the modern mysteries, they don't say anything about the Lucifers who fought against the gods as being especially in the grape. I would say that all vines, because they are horizontal, the horizontal vines are approaching an animal-like state, and in that animal-like state, they manifest more desire, and desire is the quality that the Lucifers have and try to get us revved up into. The Luciferic sins are go ahead and do it, have a great time. And so that I don't know anything. Do you know any references in Steiner about the grapes being Luciferic? Yeah. Plato in the Ancients, I don't know where it is, maybe in the Laws, but he talks about that in the Orphic cults, they were very Apollinine, and they did not want to take in wine, but they did use intoxication for one purpose, and that is when they were about to take someone out of the body, they didn't know how they were going to react to the desire world. It was chancy because the Hierophants in those days did not have enough wisdom to know how people were going to respond, whether they were going to, because the greatest sorcerers and the greatest black magicians and the complete dropouts were people that were initiates or tried to be initiated. They were very high spiritual people that peaked too soon, and they tried to force things, and then they fell into great degradation. And when they gave over to their lower nature, the lower nature was imbued with all of the wisdom that they had, and so what was once pure and holy became very, very degraded. And so the Hierophants were very careful about who they would take out of the body. And so what they hit on was this was a good use for wine. And so Plato says what we do is we get a candidate for initiation, we get him good and drunk, and we see if he can reason well, and if he gives way to the lower and baser desires and such like that. And if the candidate does not fall for these things, it's a pretty safe bet that if we take him out of the body, that he's not going to get swept away by all kinds of things. Entities in the desire world may be Luciferic. I don't know. That's usually what it is, because I'm willing to believe what Plutarch says here, that the alcohol, especially the alcohol of wine, is likely to be Luciferic, because the result of it, when you take it in, a person does not become more cautious and aromatic. One becomes indeed much more Luciferic and much more revved to go out and do all of those things. Oh boy, the shame of the things that I did under the influence of alcohol. The modern mysteries, especially the post-Christian mysteries, claim that the purpose of alcohol is to wipe out hereditary clairvoyance and involuntary clairvoyance that is more of an animal nature. It's like saying that before the wheels can spin forward, they have to have been stopped from spinning backwards. And one of the effects of taking alcohol is it stops the involuntary clairvoyance. This is why a lot of people who have a good deal of involuntary clairvoyance in their blood, in their genetic makeup, in the etheric makeup, are, like, for example, Native Americans, especially Native Americans far north, like the Inuits. They can't stay away from the alcohol. You go out in the Navajo Indian reservations, there are kids that are 9 and 10-year-old that are alcoholics. And the same thing that gives them the insight, the old kind of insight, gives them the intolerance to alcohol and the ability to stop drinking alcohol. And then if the ideal would be that a person would drink alcohol until all hereditary and all involuntary clairvoyance was stopped. And once that is stopped, Then we do our work in the world, because the amount of work that people can do who are alcohol drinkers is well known, especially in fields like newspapers and such like that. They say that some people can work for days and hours, just let them drink, And then they learn by getting the experience, because the involuntary clairvoyant has sort of not control and a vigor of wanting to get into the body, and there is associated with that a certain amount of laziness, when it isn't really laziness, but it is a reticence about doing anything in the material world, because there is a vague sense of well-being from being still attuned to the inner worlds. And so by turning that all off, one then works in the world, because there's no heaven for them anymore. There's only the material world. And then they develop the soul material so that they can open up the forward-going clairvoyance. That's the modern take on wine. But the same thing. It's all ideas of purification. You see, we're sinking as we see in the symphony. We started out talking about the highest truth, and then we talked about divination, and then we've been getting more and more down into the very practical taboos. The higher things are still being talked about, but it's down into the practical taboos, and then things come back out again. So even all of these introductions to Isis and Osiris are like the dip into matter and the coming back out of it. It's a marvelous, marvelous thing. Now the next thing is really far out, and even Plutarch thinks so. It's on fish taboos. The most fabulous is the one that comes after that. As to sea fish, all Egyptians abstain generally, not from all fish, but from some, as for example, those of the oxyrhynchus gnome, from those caught with a hook, for they venerate the sharp-snouted fish. They fear that the hook is not pure when sharp snout is caught by it. While those of Syene gnome abstain from the devourer, for that it seems that it appears together with the rising of the Nile, and all that it shows their growth to those in joy, see as a self-sent messenger. They saw the rising of the Nile as a harbinger, because all of their agriculture depended on it. Their priests, on the other hand, abstain from all, and even on the 9th of the first month, when every one of the rest of the Egyptians eats a broiled fish in front of his front door, the priests do not taste it, but burn their fishes to ashes before the doors of the temple. And they have two reasons for this, of which I will later take up the sacred and extraordinary one according to the facts religiously deduced concerning Osiris and Typhoon. The evident, the one that's close at hand, is showing forth the fish as a not necessary and a not unsuperfluous cooked food, bears witness unto Homer, who makes neither the Phaeacians of luxurious lives, nor yet the Ithacaean island men use fish, nor yet Odysseus' companions in so great a voyage on the sea before they came at last to the strait. And generally the priests think that the seas from fire and beyond the boundaries, not part nor element of earth, but of another kind of superfluity, corrupted and corrupting. Sounds really fabulous, and it is. It's deeply, deeply coded. Strangely enough, the people of the oxyrhynchus gnome, that gnome is the gnome of Typhon, that is of Set. And so they refuse to eat the oxyrhynchus fish, which is probably a pike, because it's caught by a hook. and they think that the pike has the hook nose, and they think that it's poisoned. That means caught in its own ways. There are probably all kinds of deep mysteries involved in this. I'll talk about some ideas that I have from the mysteries about it, but I can't say that that these are necessarily the ones that are the Egyptians or that the Platonists had. I think what they're talking about, catching the fish by its own passion, they're talking about the hook. The fish represents subconscious desires, clearly. And being caught by the hook means being caught by the love of something. The hook was like this, or sometimes like this. That is the ankh, and ankh means love, or lover of. Tut ankamin, meant tut, lover of Amen. Because you just take the ankh out of it. You can take the words apart, and they have meanings that way. Unfortunately, the anthropologists don't take them apart that way, but it does make sense. And what they're talking about here is getting caught in the snares of the flesh. The fish represents innocence, because the most subconscious of all of our desires are innocent desires. And so there is a poisoning of innocence by being hooked on the material world, on pleasure, on the snares of the flesh, is what they seem to be pointing at here. Plus, there is also Neptune's hook, because in Neptune's trident, all of the prongs are barbed. And that is being hooked in another way. Neptune rules all of addiction, and the addiction arises from a desire to have a glamorous ecstasy perpetually. Like if I were to give talks like this perpetually, when I am allowed to share things and things are given to me to share, if I tried to stay in this state all of the time, which it's not possible for a human being to do, you can get hooked. And so you resort to things like theobromide in chocolate, or in the case of performers, they get hooked on heroin or whatever. And it's a hooking that goes the other way. You get ensnared into matter more deeply, like the pike gets hooked by the hook, by wanting to be out of it, by wanting to be in that state of ecstasy all the time. Now they're talking about the second fish here, and anytime we see two fish, we smell Pisces coming up somewhere. The people of Syene, and the Syene was another node that was associated with Set Typhon, and there they don't eat the devourer. The sea bream is what the devourer is, and the whole idea here is that they don't eat it because, hey, I missed a whole section here, didn't I? Oh, yes, I missed a whole section. 2 sections I missed. Where am I in my notes here? I'll have to go back and cover them. Because of the superfluity of the Nile. And we'll have to hold it there, because to get to the superfluity of the Nile, we'll have to talk about the 2 sections that we missed. No, we'll come back to this. Well, all right. The 2 sections, I flipped over 2 pages in my notes. Right after the part where we were talking about the initiates putting on the robes I'm very sorry for this. Wow, what a state of disorganization. Caught in my own folly. Oh. Yeah, that always happens.
What part of that now? 4 or
Yeah,
the bishop was part 4.
yeah, no, part 4 is really why the priests are shaven and wear linen. Because we get really into some of this cleverness. Now, as far as the many are concerned, even this commonest and smallest secret is hid from them, namely why the priests cut off their hair and wear linen robes. For some do not at all care to know about these things, while others say that they abstain from the use of the sheep's wool as they do from its flesh because they hold it secret, and that they shave off their heads through being in mourning and wear linen things on account of the color which the flax in the flower sends forth, resembling the etheric radiance that surrounds the cosmos. But the true cause, the one of all, is, as Plato says, because it is not lawful for the pure to touch not pure. Now superfluity of nourishment and excretion is nothing chaste or pure, and it is from superfluities that wool and fur and hair and nails spring up and grow. It would thus be laughable for them to cut off their own hair with purifications, shaving themselves and making themselves smooth their whole body evenly, and then put on and wear the hair of animals. For indeed we should think that Hesiod, when he says, "Nor from the 5-branched at fire blooming of gods, cut dry from green with flashing blade." That's a very obscure reference, but it happens to be central to all of the Greek mysteries. But teaches that men ought to keep holy day only when pure of such superfluities, and not at the sacred operations themselves have need of purification and the removal of superfluities. And again, the flax grows out of the deathless earth and yields a fruit that man may eat, and offers him a smooth, pure raiment that does not weigh upon the watcher, but it is well joined for every hour, and is the least cone-bearing, as they say, concerning which things there is another reason, logos. You could spend a lifetime on almost any one of these little things. I think he's right about saying that most people don't care about the secrets. But then he does something really sly. He says that the others that say that they don't eat lamb or mutton or wear wool because they hold the sheep sacred. They shave their hair in being in mourning, and they wear linen because the flax flower is the color of the radiant ethers. There are several types of flax. The most common has a very a light blue-violet flower, which is sort of like the reflecting ether. Like Purple Mountain's majesty is seeing the collection of the ethers at a distance around mountains. It hangs there almost like clouds. But he says these things are not the reasons when they really are. He's sly here. They are part of the reasons. And he's saying them in the early part, but then he has to make sure that he covers up for himself so that he doesn't reveal too much, and he's, this is not it. But he gives them to you so that they're keys so that you can understand what's going to follow. The whole idea is here that he's talking about offal again. He's talking about hair and such as being contamination. This is, in a way, it is true. But what he's talking also about is he's talking about the ethers. Because he's saying that various things have emanations. We've talked about this a lot, for example, in the astrology lectures when we talk about Aries being a fiery sign, and the fiery signs have a really strong positive emanation. And if somebody is mediumistic or involuntarily clairvoyant, if they take off all of their clothes and lay on a pure wool blanket, especially in certain kinds of orientations to the poles, they see pictures, because there's something that revs up their energies from they're still in the wool, something of the etheric nature of the sheep, which is very strong because of the radiant, fiery type of quality that is associated with sheep and rams. It is true that there are contaminations, because in the ancient days, when you didn't do it by love, but that you did it by the law, as he just said, his initiation into the mysteries was all living by the law. When you lived the law to the T, then you could be initiated, and very few made it. In the modern mysteries, it's not how legalistic of a life you live, but how much you love. In those days, when Plato had to give alcohol and such, people were so sensitive that they couldn't even touch each other, even though they were harmoniously, like Madame Blavatsky talks, for example, about people who were going to be initiates that were to do magic. They would spend years in the jungle, a group of them that were picked astrologically so that they were harmonious to each other, and they couldn't touch each other, and they could never touch an animal of any kind, and they couldn't touch certain plants, because they were sensitizing themselves so much and trying to gain control of all of that, that with this sensitivity and the tenuousness of the initiatory process in those days, they would have just been taken way off track. When they got through the whole process, they were very strong. And so what is talked about here, when they don't wear wool, it's saying that the most obvious, the strongest etheric force that you can get from the substance in the animal world as clothing, they don't wear that. Also, what he's saying about superfluities again, it's considered hair and nails and such like that are considered excrement. But the real excrement that they're talking to is miasma. That there are, when you eat certain ways, you produce miasma. But we'll leave that for just a little bit. The cutting of hair also represents a sacrifice. This illusion of cutting from the five-branched tree of fire, the five-branched tree of fire is the human being. And there is the process, we've talked about it a lot, and the last time we talked about Isis and Osiris. Kalete, where the means of pruning off the unnecessary desires, the unnecessary thoughts, the unnecessary habits, the unnecessary movements, and that the more you pruned off of them, the more your soul became purified, and the less likely you were to be influenced by the things that really contaminate us. And again, on a higher level, it's the more you approach living like the divine feminine who throws off all of these kinds of things. So the process of kalete, which is alluded to in the Bible, like the withering of the fig tree, or the pruning of the fig tree, is, as it probably should be stated, is the removal of unnecessary actions and desires in ourselves. The part about about linen, I don't know all of the lore of linen, especially its etheric meaning. I do know that it's very much associated with purity. Even in the Catholic times, they took over the ancient things, and the purest Catholic nuns were supposed to wear only white linen. These were the ones that lived in nunneries and away from things. And so you can see when he starts talking about the efflux of ether surrounding everything, that blue color of the linen flower, he's giving you a hint as to how to interpret everything that follows. He's saying this has something to do with the ethers, and it has to do with purging and cleansing yourself in the ethers, and it's of that nature. All right. The next section is called On Refraining from Flesh and Salt and Superfluities. And the priest handles so heartily the nature of superfluities, this is again excesses, that they do not deprecate the many kinds of pulse and meats, the sheep flesh kinds and swine flesh kinds, as making much superfluity, but also at their times of purification they remove the salts from the grains, having other further reasons, as well as the fact that it makes the more thirsty and more hungry sharpen their desire the more. For to argue that salts are not pure owing to the multitude of small lives that are caught and die in them when they solidify themselves, as Aristagoras said, is naive. Again, as he's covering up, he's a rascal. They are, moreover, said to the water, the atheists, they are moreover said to water the atheists, which is the sacred bull, also from a special well, and not by means to keep him from the Nile, not that they drink his water stained with blood because of the crocodile, as some think, for nothing is so precious to the Egyptians as the Nile, but that the water of the Nile superfluity on being drunk seems to make fat, nay, rather make much too much flesh. And so they do not wish the atheists to be so, nor yet themselves, but wear their bodies on their souls compact and light, and neither compress nor oppress them by the mortal part prevailing, and its weighing down of the divine. Very, very beautiful statement. What he's talking about here are indulgences. When Don Juan Matos tells Carlos that his greatest fault is that he is an indulger, and Carlos eventually has to agree, and I think any one of us that realizes our false nature, our sinful nature, we realize that we indulge ourselves. We even indulge ourselves in doing good. And when we do indulge ourselves, we take what could be pure actions and we contaminate them. Obviously, the vitality that works in us is pure. When we eat the wrong things, we contaminate it. And it does indeed become something, who would want to be around somebody that doesn't shower all the time, because you're not getting rid of all of the ick. I'm not just talking about sweat and physiological stuff. I'm talking about what has produced that, the indulgent kind of living and those kinds of desires that go along with it. And so those are the kinds of things that he's talking on. He's talking about here excess. To the Greek initiate, above the temple door, it was always nothing too much. And by excess, when you overdo, that is again the whole Luciferic fault. We're talking about Typhon, and Typhon is the Lucifer of the Egyptians. Set is the red-haired Lucifer with the cloven hoof. And with that, he is leading people into indulgences and into excesses so that they can't appreciate the value of life, that they have only the reveling in a moment and not even the appreciation of that moment, because there is a surfeit which cloys and destroys the senses and numbs us and dulls us, Show me somebody that eats too much, and I'll show you a person who's trying to dull their consciousness because they can't stand living life. They don't have the faith and love to do it. They can't handle it, so they turn it off by overeating. And when he's talking about that they don't take the salts, he's saying that there is superfluity right in the animals themselves. And what he's saying that is if you take in animals, you're taking in the animal desire body. And the animal desire body only cares about reproduction, and it only cares about getting more food for itself. And when you take that into you, you're taking that in as part of your body. Whereas if that rots into the ground and a pure plant, it doesn't have a desire body at all. It's purified, and when you take that into you, have something that's going to last, and you're going to be clear. When he's talking about the multitude of lives in the animal salts, he's talking about bacteria. And he's saying that, we don't not eat meat because we're killing not only the life of the animal, but all the bacteria that are in there. He's saying that's not so. There are other reasons for it. And then he goes on and he talks about salt itself leading people into greater desire. And I can say that this is true, that in the times of my life that I take in more sodium chloride, which is ruled by the moon, and which is where the Luciferic cast-offs of the human life wave have a lot of their consciousness focus, which is why the moon had to be removed in the first place. These sodium salts in the body have to do with the interstitial fluids, whereas the living stuff that has to do with the sun and the pure life is what is within the cell, that is in the potassium family. And so that in the whole process of even going to sleep and losing consciousness, that is when that's when the interstitial fluids invade the cells and they produce lactic acid and it collects in the brain, and it's all of that is all tied together. But I don't want to too much go into that. So what he's talking about then is excess, that they won't even feed the bull the water of the Nile. Now, when they're talking about the Nile and Osiris being the same thing, that's why this reads so weird, that the Nile and Osiris are one and the same. They're talking about superfluity. Osiris is a Jupiter type of being. We're going to come to more of that when we actually start telling the story. He is sort of their Zeus, but a watery Zeus. And they're saying that with the rising of the Nile, that this is a superfluity also. And what is being alluded to here is that in the same way that there is this giant universal process of the life spirit throwing off all of these forms and materializing them and then digesting the bits and then taking them back up, there are two currents of life in our living. That at certain phases of the moon there is a superfluity of life that enters into our body and gets activated in the area of the genitals, and then it rises. And so what we're talking about are two forces, one that is superfluous, that produces form. Everything, it's our forward-going, rolling type of consciousness that in it, we're talking about the Nile being the spine now, it brings us to be more earthly. And the other is if we are seeking the spiritual life or the initiate life, we take the backward motion, we cleanse ourselves of the unnecessary or superfluous desires by looking backwards at our life in the process of retrospection. And in doing that, we go through the process of tleta and a curing and a cutting off of what is unnecessary. And that is how the assimilation takes place when we disrobe Isis and go back to the life spirit. And so he's talking about the ebb and the flow of the Nile being that very thing like that. So it's all tied together. All right. Then, and after that then follows the section on drinking of wine, and now we're back at the fish taboos where we meant to be in the first place. All right. Now, he says about the fish tab, we've already talked about the purification, the impurity that comes about from being hooked on matter or being hooked on the spirit in such a way that we try to escape. He's talking again here about Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, and he's talking about those being two journeys where they were delayed and they journeyed to Troy and then the journey back again. These are, again, I'd love to come to cover the Iliad and the Odyssey, but it would probably take me 5 or 6 years to do it because there is so much in there, but that is, again, the two phases of the same type of cycle. Now, he talks about the not eating of fish, and he says that is done on the first month of the year, which was the month of Thoth, which corresponds to our month of Virgo. And Virgo is, the end of Virgo is the time of the equinox. And so we have a story here about two fish, Pisces, and with the burning of the fish is the consuming of the fish is something like, how would you say it? We talked about this the last time we talked about Isis and Osiris. But there is something, in fact we've come to this, to stargazing a number of times, that is various positions of stars and planets relative to the sun have various meanings. When a star is with the sun and consumed by the light of the sun, that is called cosmical. A planet is cosmical when it can't be seen. A planet or star is acroniacal when it is opposite the sun. And so what we're talking about is a festival of consuming or burning the fish in Virgo at the autumnal equinox. And this represents an acroniacal solstical festival. And the acroniacal, the sun is the obvious. It represents the exoteric. Whereas the spiritual sun, or the counter-earth, which is seen at the opposite side of the heavens, has to do with the esoteric life. And since the time after the autumn equinox is the more spiritual time of the year, when there is indeed the cutting back of superfluities. This is about as cutting back as you can get to the cold that we're having out now. You're not out there frolicking it, or as one very witty wag said, at least the rapists can't be active at this time of the year for fear of freezing their little weenies. Yeah, so, all right, so that the winter half of the year is very holy. The outward time, the summertime, is when we're basking in materialism, and then life is easy. The spiritual life is more the life of sacrifice. And then the burning of the fish, or the consuming of the fish, represents a beginning of the holy half of the year that has to do with the sacrifice of fish. And the burning of the water by fire, this is a very, very esoteric thing, or that water is a product of fire, not only that water is thrown off whenever anything is burned. H2O is one of the releases of all fire as we know it, not all oxidation, but all fire. It's saying that water comes into existence. What used to be transparent space comes into existence by the agency or by the positivity of the sun in its burning fire. So we're talking about that kind of activity when we're talking about the fish taboos. And I'm obviously skipping a lot of stuff here because there's way too much for us to do. Now comes to me, most far out, and the most far out, the Plutarch, meaning that it is the most down to earth, and then we start coming out. It's called the onion and pig taboos. For nothing reasonless or purely fabulous, or for mere superstition, as some suppose, has been incorporated into the foundation of the sacred operations. But some things have moral and needful causes, while others are not without a share in the embellishment of science and physics, as for instance the case of the onions. The story that Dictys, the nursling of Isis, this is again a preview into the story, fell into the river and was drowned in trying to catch the onions with his hands is utterly incredible, which means that it's got a deep truth in it. The priests, however, keep themselves pure of the onion and treat it hardly, being ever on the watch against it, because it is the only thing whose nature is to be well nourished and to flourish when the moons wane. It's food for neither fast nor feast, neither for the former, in that it makes those feeding in thirst, while for the latter it makes them weep. And in like manner they consider the sow an unholy animal, because it seems covered, especially when the moon is on the wane, while the bodies of those who drink its milk burst forth into leprosy and scabrous roughness. I don't know who would think of drinking pig milk anyway, but... And the tale Lagos, they tell, after once only sacrificing and eating pig at the full moon, namely that Typhon, while pursuing pig towards full moon, found the wooden coffin in which the body of Osiris lay dead, and scattered it in pieces. They do not at all receive, thinking it is a mere trifling mishearing like many more. But they say their ancients so protected themselves against softness of living and extravagance and agreeable sensations that they had a slab was set up in the holy place at Thebes with deprecations lettered on it, which means engraved or chiseled, on it against Minos, the king who first changed the Egyptians from the way of life without riches and without needs and plain. Moreover, Technoctus, father of Borcherus, is said when marching on the Arabs were one of the nomes of Egypt, when his baggage was delayed, to have used with joy the food nearest at hand, and afterwards to have fallen into deep sleep on a bed of straw, and so embraced frugality, and in consequence of this he is said to have execrated the Meneian, and with the approval of the priests to have graven his execration on stone. Oh boy, I'm starting to get tired already.
Richard, are you going for a third 45 minutes?
No. Yeah, I'm going. Yeah, this is going to go on, but the reading of the third tape was where that one got chewed up earlier.
So you're going to do another 45 minutes?
I don't know. I think maybe 20 minutes. We're on page. We're at 3.5 out of 5 pages of notes. We'll move along pretty fast now because I'm getting tired and I can't carry up. I had an extremely withering kind of week, and I'm very weak at this point, and I've been pedaling on the bike, which takes a lot out of you too. So what he's calling superstitions are where the deepest things are hidden. He does that to cover for himself. It's interesting if we remember the myth of Perseus. Perseus was one of the descendants of Aegyptus through Danae. And Danae was cast out to sea with Perseus in a box, just like Osiris was cast in a box. And then they were found by a poor fisherman named Dictys. And so there is some really interest there, all sorts of sideline things here that, this is tied together with the whole connection between Egypt and Greece and the way the Egyptian mysteries are celebrated, in fact, he's going to show that even more, are based on a wisdom that goes back into time, and to some extent Egypt here means Atlantis as well, but we won't get a chance at that. He thinks it's fabulous that there are onions that float on the water or that grow on the water, and that is another illusion, symbolic illusion. For example, the narcissus is an onion that is basically in the onion family, and it grows right next to the water. And so there is an illusion here about talking about dicties falling into the water. It's one of the double play allusions on the Narcissus myth. Because on one hand, Narcissus looked into the water and became vain when he saw his own reflection, and he died in that vanity, which is to be puffed up like the smoke thing of Set. On the other hand, Isis looks into the water and sees himself. It's like looking into that pure light of the life spirit. And when he sees himself as part of that light, then he is purified and he commits suicide to the earthly kind of living. And so something like that is what he's hinting to in all of this. What he's talking about with onions has something to do because onions put most of their energy into the root. And a lot of plants, especially the onion, when the moon is waning, the energies are turned downward into the root, into the underground, and it's going opposite the cycle because most forms build as the moon builds up with light. This is why some people cut their hair when the moon is waning, because it won't grow back so fast. Or they do their weeding or cutting of hay or something like that. There was something that they don't want to come back fast. They would do that under a waning moon rather than under a waxing moon. And what he's talking about here is again the cycle of outward manifestation and then undoing in two stages of the cycle. In this case, it's a lunar cycle. And he's saying that the onion goes opposite of that. And the reason that he's saying that this is, it shows like a quality of rebellion. And what he's saying that if you're, eating the onions makes you thirsty, which again brings you right into the material world. Whereas if you're in that sensitive state like fasting, they make you cry when you're supposed to be joyous while you're fasting. And it's again when you get things all backwards, which is exactly what happens when we're in the material world. We see many things backwards from their true nature. Probably we could tie this in even more. There was another reason, at least the Greeks gave another reason, if the Egyptians didn't, for not eating onions is because onions are highly sulfurous. And when you eat a lot of sulfur and you eat a lot of protein with it, like eating meat with smothered in onions is asking to develop more semen. And if you're trying to live a continent life where you hold both the physical expression and the spiritual stuff in continents, it's not a very good idea to be eating a lot of onions with the sulfur in it. In fact, in the Mideast, in Islamic mythology, for example, the statement is that where Lucifer put down his right foot is where the onion sprang up when he set into the Garden of Eden. And when he put his left foot down is where garlic set in. And I happen to love both of them, but then I'm sort of a rebel also. Then he comes to the pig stuff. I think what he's trying to say with the pig stuff, the whole mentioning of leprosy, he's talking again about effluvium when he's talking about the light coming on the pig at certain times of the month. He's talking about an out-and-out miasma that comes about. The first half of the Earth period is called the Mars half of the Earth period, and the second half is called the Mercury half. And in the first half of the Earth period, our sins were sins of Mars, and too violent of an action and all like that. And the chief diseases then were infectious diseases and diseases that produce redness measles and scarlet fever, and the chief of them would be, when even the flesh falls away, leprosy. Whereas in the second half of the Mercury half, the diseases are more the diseases of the mind and mind-controllable diseases like cancer and self-hatred diseases like AIDS and such like that. So what is being talked about here is with the pig, that eating the boar's flesh once a year, that the priests eat the boar's flesh once a year. We know that the boar represented wisdom. And they didn't eat it because it was necessarily a contaminated food, but because, how does Steiner say it, all of the cosmic wisdom in a pig that goes into the body. Whereas, and that's why it has a short tail. Everything goes into the body. And in humans, the cosmic wisdom goes into creative activity, and this is why the highest spiritual things in the flesh are found in the boar. And it was probably at one of the solstices that they probably had the highest initiations or did things of that nature. He talks about the height of superfluity produces dullness, and that's what this whole imprecation business is. And I don't want to go into it. I'm getting a little bit tired here. And we have 3 sections left, and then we will take up the story next time. The next section is called The Kings, the Riddles, and of the Priests, and the Meaning of Ammon. The kings were appointed from the priests or from the warriors, the one caste possessing worth and honor through manliness, the other through wisdom. And he who was appointed from the warriors immediately became one of the priests and shared in their philosophy, which for the most part was hidden in myths and words, logi, containing dim reflections and transparencies of truth, as doubtless they themselves make indirectly plain by fittingly setting sphinxes up before the temples as though their reasoning about the gods possessed a wisdom wrapped in riddle. Beautiful. Isn't that, that's one of the most beautiful passages I've seen. Indeed, the seat of Athena, that is Isis as they think, Sais, used to have the following inscription on it: I am all that has been and is and shall be, and no mortal has ever revealed my robe. Moreover, while the majority think that the proper name of Zeus with the Egyptians is Ammon, which we by slight change call Ammon, Mantheo Sibainti considers his hidden one, and that his power hiding is made plain by the very articulation of the sound. Heraclitus of Abdera says that the Egyptians use this word to one another also when they call one to them, for that its sound has got the power of calling to. Wherefore they call to the first God, who they think is the same for every man, as unto the unmanifest and hidden, invoking him to make him manifest and plain of them, they say, Amun. So great then was the care the Egyptians took about the search for wisdom which concerned the mysteries of the gods. Yeah, very beautiful. He's talking here about riddles. The most famous of being the riddle of Isis is again talking about the whole idea of taking off things. Because when there is the perception of things, of the veils of Isis or of the funerary veils, when there is that perception, there is dualism between the perceiver and the object of perception. And that in order to see Isis, in order to see that pure feminine light through which the truth radiates, one must get beyond the dualism. And that the primary part of that dualism is a dualism of self versus not self. And when we unify with the truth, all seership is a unification with the object of seership, and in that a new kind of consciousness is born that rises above the two. And this is what he's alluding to, that no mortal who is a dualistic person can see Isis. He has a most unusual spelling and pronunciation. Instead of saying Ammon, even it's bad Greek, it's bad Egyptian, but Plutarch uses Amun for Ammon, which is very important because it marks a really good place for Egypt. It's sort of halfway between Aum and Amen. And it represented, the calling forth is obviously the uttermost invocation. It's not saying, hi over there, come on over to my side of the street. It is an invocation, and it represented to them the same thing that the Aum represented to the people of India, to come at one or to invoke the spirit or to unite with something. And he's being very literal here when he's talking about the practices of the Egyptians, that all of their mysteries were myths because that's where the truth lives in, and that they are magical words because it is the whole process of opening up to the various levels of the various worlds is to unify with them, but that unification is done by vibrating or living a word out. If there is a word for God, it is our name, and at each initiation we learn another syllable of it by being able to vibrate it out of ourself and live it and reach a new level of consciousness within ourselves. And so these are the kinds of things that he's alluding to, and I'm really ripping through this as fast as I possibly can. Because I'm tired and you're tired. It's an awfully long time to sit. We're down to two sections. The second last called of Greek disciples of Egyptians and of Pythagoras and his symbols. And the most wise of the Greeks are also witnesses: Solon, Thales, Plato, Eudoxus, Pythagoras, and some say Lycurgus as well, through coming to Egypt and associating with her priests. And so they say that Eudoxus was a hearer of Chronophis of Memphis, Solon of Sanchis of Sais, and Pythagoras of Oenophus of Heliopolis. And the last, especially as it appears being contemplated and contemplating, brought back to the memory of his men their symbolic and mysterious art concerning their dogmas in dark sayings. For most of the Pythagorean messages leave out nothing of what are called the hieroglyphic letters, for instance. Eat not on what bears two. Sit not down on measure. Plant not phoenix. Stir not fire with knife in house. And for myself, at least, I think that his men's calling the monad Apollo, and the dyad Artemis, and the hebdomad Athena, and the first cube Poseidon also remembers those whose statues preside over the sacred places, and whose dramas are acted there, yea, and the names painted there as well. The dramas acted is talking about the whole initiatory process. For they write the king and lord Osiris with eye and... Oops, is that really the page? Yes. With eye and scepter, but some interpret the name as many-eyed, since in the Egyptian tongue, os means many, and eye, eye, many eyes. And they write heaven as unaging through eternity with heart. That is spirit rising up from altar underneath. And at Thebes there used to be set up handless statues of judges, while the statue of the Chief Justice had its eyes tight shut, seeing that justice neither gives nor takes gifts, nor is worked on. And for the warriors, scarab was their seal emblem, for the scarab is not female, but all scarabs are male, and they engender their seed into matter or material, which they make into spheres, preparing a field not so much of nourishment as of Genesis. Boy, I want to take this all apart, part by part. It's going to be a little long, I guess. I should know it, that when I put in as much time and as much study, it's always going to run long. Oh, boy. When he talks about contemplating and contemplated self-contemplation, he's talking about the unity that comes out of duality. Rudolf Steiner says it the best that I've heard anyone say it, where he says, if you want to know yourself, look without. If you want to know the without, look within yourself. It's like saying what you notice in the external world and what you see in the external world is a direct representation of what you are in your awakening inmost being that you're not wakingly conscious of. But on the other hand, if you want to know the mystery of what is outside, you cannot remain a dualistic stranger to it. You must go within yourself and unify and find what is in yourself that is that same object outside of yourself. So when he's showing great reverence for the Pythagoreans contemplating and contemplated, it's a very beautiful thing. The mentioning of the three that he mentions, Pythagoras at Heliopolis, Solon at Sais, and Chronopolis at Memphis, he's actually doing something here that's very subtle. If you look up those gnomes, you find out that they make a trinity. Sun, moon, and I forget what the other one is. Obviously the one at Sais is the moon and Heliopolis is the sun. And he's showing a principle of trinity here. See, we have dipped down into matter and we're coming out of spiritual things first by speaking words, and now we're getting to what we get to the Godhead. And he's talking about all of those things. Let's talk just a little bit about the Pythagorean superstitions. Eat not on what bears two is saying don't partake of any vehicle that is dualistic. What we're trying to do is get away from dualism into spiritual monism again. Sit not down on measure means to not go back into the measure was cubical, and it's not to go back into materialism or be content with a materialistic meaning. Plant not phoenix means to not plant a date palm, which has Mideastern meanings having to do with the sexual energy, but the phoenix was a red-colored tree, and it represented don't project angry or lustful thoughts or such like that. And stir not fire with a knife in the house has to do, that's again with the telete, and having to do when you're in the body, do not rev the fiery energies up the fullest. You have to be out of the body to do that, or you're going to destroy yourself. He does a very, very cunning thing in here. He says they called Apollo the monad, which is true, Artemis the dyad, which means the sun is one and the moon is two. The hebdomad he calls Athena, which is not so. The hebdomad is supposed to be Poseidon. The sacred seven is with Neptune. And the first cube is with Athena and the moon, because the moon is the 8th sphere, meaning the lower octave, where things have been taken to the level of materialism that there is no belief of anything inside of them. So the cube represents the principle of building of the square taken to another power, and so the number 8, the first cube number, represents the 8th sphere, which is in many schools of occultism the sphere of death that comes from the ultimate kind of hardening. The one eye that has many eyes on the top of the staff, we know what that is. We don't have to go into that. We're familiar with all of that. The soul or the spirit rising out of matter being seen as a heart, the heart being the full amount of conscience that we have gleaned out of material things, and the uprising of that being the soul material. And then we come to the scarab, and the scarab was sacred to the sun, and it was a dung beetle, and the scarab laid its eggs in the manure and then rolled the manure into a ball, and the ball kept getting bigger and bigger, and sometimes it got as big as a pool ball, and the scarab had to stand on its head in order to push it with its legs. And it's their myth of Sisyphus, and then the sun would heat up the dung ball, and that would be how the eggs were hatched. And it says right in here that this is a creative activity. And the hint that it gives that all scarabs, it's very hard to tell the male from the female, and both the male and female scarab do share in the paternal duties. But what the Greeks are trying to say with these scarabs being all male is that the manifest spirit is considered masculine, whereas the absolute is the womb or the feminine in which the activity takes place. And so the allusion to the scarab as the highest symbol is relating to that. All right, let's read the last section, and we're about done tonight. And then we'll start the story next time. Advice to Clea concerning the hidden meaning of the myths. When therefore thou hearest the myth sayings of the Egyptians concerning the gods, wanderings and dismemberings and many such passions, thou shouldst remember what has been said above, and think none of these things spoken as they really are in state and action. For they do not call Hermes dog as a proper name, but they associate the watching and waking from sleep of the animal, who by knowing and not knowing determines friend from foe, as Plato says, with the most logos-like of the gods. Nor do they think that the sun rises as a newborn babe from a lotus, but so they write, sunrise, riddling and rekindling of the sun from the moist elements. Moreover, they call the most crude and awesome king of the Persians Oakchus, who killed many and finally cut the throat of Aphis and made a hearty meal of him with his friends, Knife. And they call him so unto this day in the catalogue of their kings, not of course signifying his essence by its proper name, but lighting the hardness of his mood into an instrument of slaughter. So too shalt thou, if thou hearest and receivest the mysteries about the gods from those who interpret the myth purely and according to the love of wisdom, and if thou dost ever and keepest carefully the customs observed by the priests, and if thou thinkest that thou wilt offer neither sacrifice nor act more pleasing to the gods than holding the view concerning them, thou shalt not escape an ill no less than being without the gods, that is to say, the fearing of the demons. The myth which is told is, in its very shortest possible elements, after the purely useless and superfluous has been removed, as follows. And that's the end of his introductions. So, he's come out very literally. In fact, if you take what he says at the end, he starts out with aspiration to truth, he digs into deep superstitions, then comes out with mystery dramas and relates it to a divine geometry, and ends up saying that you can't take any of this in a literalistic fashion, because you'll become a materialist, and potentially even the worst kind of materialist, that you can only fear the demons of materialism. And so it's a very nice intro, and we're admonished to seek the truth in its highest of all activities. We've been a little bit introduced into Egyptian cultures in the way of their priests, in both a little bit of the esoteric and the exoteric, but not truly esoteric, or we would be living it out. And we see these introductions are filled with codes and images and principles and astronomical, astrological allegories and cycles and philosophical allegories, and they all have many levels of being, right from the dot game right down to not wearing wool, all off of the same principles, and it shows the same cycle of evolution on many levels. So you're sort of being prepped in all of this. So it's not an open introduction to Egyptian or Greek mysteries. It tells us the very steps that we have to take to get there in very practical ways of living, and the other steps are there also. There are the keys to crack the mystery, and basically what it all says is the same thing that all of the Indian mythology says: practice asceticism and contemplate self. Very funny the way it comes out to the same thing. So we are told we're getting a mystery myth, and we're told to read between the lines and to read very deeply. And the rules seem to be that anything worth writing down has meaning. We didn't begin to dig into even most of the stuff that I dug out of it. And there's a lot more that I don't get and may get in, future years. There is no waste. There is no superfluity in the writing. Everything is meaningful. That's what he's telling you. That's the rules of the game. Anything you see me write has meaning, and you better take it. And the strangest things, and even the disclaimers and the things that are claimed to be lies, are often the inroads into the deepest meanings. So it's he who reads may run. So next time we'll start running, and hopefully we'll have a lot of fun with it. It'll be more storytelling, and I can put the ideas together in a more cogent way. If I had done this talk taking the principles of superfluity as my own talk and the whole cycle, I think I could have done it much better, but I had to use his framework, and that's very hard. No questions? Earl says, I want sleep. Not good. At this point, I don't want any more yammering. Won't it be nice when we don't have the body and we won't have to say, I'm tired, I can't do anymore.